Katara the Last Airbender, The Rift Issue 3. Why is the first page wasted on Toph's annoying students? At least they've graduated to being teachers. It should have started with Sokka recruiting them, and there's no reason to have panels in the scene after that one. How did the writers not realize there's no enjoyment to be had in their dialogue? Katara thinks she needs to give Toph some water so she'll be able to stay focused on keeping the mind from collapsing. So Satoru gives her some, and she tells him to talk to her because she doesn't think she needs to concentrate on this. Satoru explains that he's not with his parents because he ran away from them after they joined the pro-Ozai society because of Aang. He spent months on the streets until his uncle adopted him. Why did it take months to do that? I have to assume he was just that far away from him. He admits Toph was right about him and he wishes to see out her bravery. Toph's father calls her his daughter and lampshades that this isn't the right time before trying to apologize to her, feeling too embarrassed to say the words right away. It shouldn't have taken until this point, when she's saving his life, for him to apologize. I don't find it impressive that he's apologizing and excusing himself to her only because she's saving his life. She's probably not going to get the opportunity to save her mother's life, so her mother will never like her. He explains that her running away from him caused his divorce because his wife blamed him for losing her. Which makes no sense because I thought her mother was exactly like him in the raising department. They're equally at fault. Why didn't she grow a spine and tell him off otherwise? Then she'd be better for her to reunite with. He says he's here because of the divorce causing him to move here. So it's convenient that he still forgives her for saving his life, when she's just saving him from the mess she got him into in the first place. Because he doesn't know whether he'll survive this or not, he admits that he's worried about her every day and loves her and is sorry for everything. Toph says what I was thinking, that if he knew the real her, he'd know he has nothing to be afraid of. Katara hears some good news and somehow thinks Toph can't hear it 2 feet away from her. Why are these metal benders having a conversation instead of spending all their time trying to save the day? Couldn't they have been told they needed to dig these people out by Sokka on the way here? The pacing drags until eventually the metal bending starts, and they dig up a big mess. And once again they doubt themselves even though they're teachers now, because we need more padding. And the metal bending digs up the people underneath, and Toph faints. Katara and Aang kiss, and eventually, Nutha thanks Katara. The uncle is smart enough to be happy because he's surrounded by a fortune's worth of iron, and plans to ship the iron to his plant in the Fire Nation to process it, so that Lao won't have any claim on its profits. He'd still have claim on it if he knew that it was from here. I guess his idea is he won't know he has claim on it. Aang wants to finish the ceremonial meal, but their base is broken. And he remembers the avatars are linked, and earthbounds a rock into a new Roku artifact to connect himself with Roku again. Well, that was easy. It makes more logical sense that he can just connect to the avatars with any old things as long as he feels like they're connected to him. Because otherwise it'd have to be that there's some magical spells on the artifacts themselves to let him only do it using them. It's convenient though. If it wasn't this way, it would be impossible to contact the earliest avatars who wouldn't have any remaining artifacts connecting them. Aang starts trying to explain himself to Roku, when Roku would know why he did that already, because he wants a conversation started with him. Thankfully, Roku puts his arms out, letting him hug him. He apologizes and says he missed him, despite showing no signs of it earlier. I wish I got to see something like this in the latest Sonic comic. It's actually making me feel things. Even if it's sad, it's also a relief. It's more engaging and respectable to have a comic cause emotions like this than nothing but frustration. Roku admits that the avatars can only advise him based on their own lives, and that Aang should find the balance between them and him. So he asks Yang Chen for the terms of her agreement. It turns out the iron that was dug up is the evil spirit's armor. Apparently he was too incompetent to keep it with himself, so now he might come back. If he valued it so much, why did he just leave it here instead of taking it with him to wherever he went? And it's implied by her lack of a proper yes or no that burying the armor again won't stop the rampage from happening. Or she's just too scared of being wrong to say no. Aang doesn't get the hint because he still thinks that'll work when he reunites with his friends. He plans on making this place look the way it did before humans were building here, even if it means destroying the town. Which really makes him no better than the spirit who plans on destroying the town anyways. At that point, why even bother trying to placate the spirit? Maybe he thinks the spirit's gonna destroy more than just the town if he doesn't do this. He tells Katara to get everyone here to evacuate. And Satoru says he saw his uncle drag the mask down the beach. He drives the forklift this time. And the cabbage salesman sees a forklift and is amazed. The uncle refuses to listen to reason that he won't be able to sail in this weather. Katara tells Aang everyone's left the buildings. And Aang at least says he hates the fact that he has to do this. The pacing's unnecessarily slow here, as usual. Toph's father tells someone to keep his voice down because Toph needs rest while he's holding her hand. He sees Aang in the sky, she wakes up and he only wants to tell her to rest, and she cathartically tells him to stop treating her like a flower and let her know what's going on. He tells her to forgive him and explains things, thinking Aang would ruin him. He convinces her to go against Aang for believable reasons because of this. Sokka conveniently hits away a shot arrow and gives Satoru his club and throws a boomerang, and talks too much boring me before he slams the archer to the ground. Satoru runs away from someone dangerous and hits something, causing a machine to spit stuff at the bad guy's head. Eventually, the evil spirit floats a mask that Satoru's uncle is still holding. Aang reasons with Toph and says there's no time to explain, even though in the amount of time he spent saying that, he could have finished explaining and convinced her. As usual, this kind of scene is exciting, but not worth describing in detail. I'm sure the comic fight scenes don't do anything the show didn't. And even if they do, it's not plot relevant. Katara waterbends to get away up to Sokka, and the uncle doesn't want to let go of the mask, but Satoru effortlessly convinces him to do so. And he's grateful to him. I like that the evil spirit was smart enough to interrupt Aang, saying he knows who the Avatar is. Aang doesn't get it and again recaps him. I guess it makes sense that he doesn't know how else to have this conversation start. The spirit only wants to destroy this place. And rather than explaining that he was gonna do that, Aang earthbends to have a giant fight with him. Toph tells her students to help Aang by peeling off the armor. After predictable dialogue, Aang eventually attacks the spirit, who admits that the humans are more powerful than him and there's no more place for spirits in the world, because the Avatar always ends up siding with the humans. I'm not the only one who didn't find him sympathetic here. He's just a bully. He keeps complaining that humans always dominate and takes off. And somehow Aang is shaken by this instead of thinking, well, you always want to be the one dominating. Toph shows respect for Aang and thanks him, and they hug. Toph's father calls his employees his friends and urges them to rebuild with him, conveniently not acting like he's ruined. If the factory being destroyed would ruin him, he shouldn't have the funds to rebuild. I guess he thinks Aang and his friends will get him the money, and he didn't think of that beforehand. Satoru's uncle gets given food, and Katara plans on going back to her tribe. Another admits she acted stupid and that Katara and Sokka make their tribe proud. Why didn't she know that obvious fact all along? Why wouldn't they know that they are necessary to the Avatar? Because you think after the Avatar won over Ozai, his friends would have made it known what exactly they did for him that was necessary? Katara decides to go comfort Aang when he's pitying those evil spirits, and eventually gets talked to by the evil spirit of the Ark's girlfriend. So how did he feel her last breath and start the Ark? As for why she didn't just tell him she was still alive, either she did and he didn't care because the fact remains that her mortal body died. That has to be it, because she knows that he loves her, so she wouldn't be too scared of him to go talk to him. She explains that once a year, she used to take the form of a human for a night and walk through the city streets, which could have easily backfired on her. Why only once a year? This caused her to fall in love with a mortal and become mortal herself so she could always be near him. Always, yeah, right, because she's still here. She married him and he blamed himself for losing her immortality. She says to Aang that spirits don't die, they just take on a new form. So General Iron should have known that and not freaked out, because spirits change form like this all the time if it's a thing that can happen, and it doesn't inconvenience them at all apparently. She should have known that. So she should have known it was pointless to make herself not immortal. She puts faith in Aang to make the world better. So it cuts ahead to months later where Sokka's selling meat at the Spirit Friendship Festival Aang started, and compromise between keeping traditions and not. Avatar: The Last Airbender, Smoke and Shadow, Issue 1. It starts with someone called Kano getting told he failed at being the governor of New Ozai. Even though he didn't fail, he was fired. And he's told things to scare him about Zuko being in charge. And he doubts the existence of a type of spirit even though he lives in a world where spirits can be a real thing. So that doesn't make sense for anybody. You'd think what he'd be questioning would instead be the fact that a spirit is interested in who's running one of the human nations at all. Which he'd have to be in order to get a vision of the future caused by him. Spirits don't care about humans. If he doesn't believe in spirits like this, who I'll call the chem spirits or evil spirits since it's easier to say, he should wonder if this is a bender posing as a spirit, because that's the only rational explanation. He should especially think this, because obviously the spirits would prefer Zuko over Ozai no matter what, because the Avatar fought Ozai, and the Avatar is part spirit. Then there's a bunch of panels that are just boring, with him talking to his Ozai fan club. Because of his spies reporting to him that Zuko will return with his mother, he plans against him. This is only here for padding because there's no entertainment and no reason to show it. The tension gotten from this would have also been felt when his followers attack anyways. One of the people in the fan club doesn't like his plan, and he's called Kalo. He just doesn't have faith in his plan to work. For no reason, Ukano doesn't go into details when telling him why he should trust his plan, just expecting him to believe he had a premonition. He could have kept his loyalty if he was more specific. At least I get to see Ki and Aang have fun riding a dolphin. It's relatable to me that Sokka thinks they're too slimy for him to have fun on. It's sweet that Ursa says he still gets a sparkle on his eye when he gets excited, and she says sorry when it embarrasses him. He says it'll be good to have him home. Ikem asks her if she's okay and explains that whenever she's scared, her hands get cold. It's weird that she's still calling him by his fake name. He likes it better than his real name after all of this time, even though he doesn't have to go by it to hide his identity anymore. And the brain implicitly recognizes his name, so you're more likely to hear your name in a conversation. She's just scared of going back to the palace. And she panics at seeing Ki on a dolphin, even though she should know that she's safe with an airbender, who's also a waterbender, so he could easily go after her if she fell into the ocean. It's just annoying to see drama that's forced. He brings her to her, and she says she doesn't want to lose her, and I have to just assume it's because she lost contact with her kids before. Realistically, her daughter tells her to let go and wants to get away from her, because she's still getting used to the fact that her mother changed faces. It's not as dramatic as it could be, thankfully, because her father just humors her and her mother understands. And she even admits she's embarrassed that she overreacted earlier. A bad writer would have not done this. Instead, he shows respect for the character to make up for the apparent disrespect, instantly. After Ty Lee hugs May's mother, my time is wasted. And she hugs May too. May plans to have fun at the tea shop, and her aunt tells her she can spend as much time with her as she wants having fun with her. Then Ty Lee's paranoid that Azula is going to go after her. This would make her more relatable, but I'm still bored. Speaking of boring, the story has her talk about a story I already read instead of having plot progression. It turns out May's mom only left her father right after he formed the new outside society because she thinks he was putting her family in danger. For no reason. They wouldn't have hurt them. Maybe Zuko would get some huge supporters who would, but they'd never find out that May, her mom, and brother were related to the leader of that club. And his supporters would know that he doesn't support violence. I feel like this is a retcon. Why did her father have to go to great lengths to get her to him? Getting K-Lo to get her to him? If her father was still with her mother. I thought her father was already divorced at that point. It's nothing but padding until May explains that for the past few weeks she's been letting K-Lo keep visiting her as just a friend because she hopes she could use him to stop her dad. May wants Ty Lee to meet Kay to get a read on him to see if he's telling the truth. Apparently she trusts her to figure that out better when she's not an earthbender and used to like Azula. I guess she only means read his aura. And she lets him kiss her cheek. So they are dating? Zuko's disappointed that his friends are already leaving the city because going back here is going to bring up all sorts of stuff for Zuko and his family, and they need to figure it out as a family, and bond with just each other. Zuko admits that makes sense instead of being a jerk and hugs Aang, thanking them. Sokka shows him affection too and calls him buddy, saying he's happy to be there for him. And it's sweet to see Zuko smile, looking forward to seeing them again. He feels sorry for his mother, asking if she's okay, and Kay ended up telling May about the plan. That happened faster than I thought. Kay eventually leaves, and it's satisfying to see May get called out on leading him on when all she had to do was just be friends with him. She's right, it is for a good cause, but she should know that he wasn't doing this to her. Of course, Ty Lee says he was being honest, and it's sweet to see Zuko admit he's lucky he has such good friends. He reassures her that Ki will come around, and out of nowhere, she reveals that she was actually thinking about Azula and asks if she's safe, warm, and happy. Zuko reassures her, thanks her, and despite her trying to talk like she's cheerful, he notices that she's scared. A bird gives him a letter from the Kyoshi warriors, which matters because he's decided not to sail to Harbor City and instead arranged for some friends to meet them there with a submarine, based on the one Sokka designed, despite being someone who grew up in a tribe. He just conveniently found out how to design a submarine in a tiny amount of time for no reason. Iroh gets out of the submarine and hugs him and he thanks him. Most of the story has no plot progression, but there's enough heartwarming moments to make it worth it anyways. You can't say that the Sonic comics are constantly like this, and that's what sucks about not having any families in their main cast. Iroh apologizes to Ursa for the suffering she went through, and she hugs him and says that he always gave her hope, even though he only stopped being an evil warmonger after he lost his son to a war. And it didn't take very long after that for Ursa to leave the city. Zuko thanks Suki for taking care of all this. She says she'll have Zuko and his companions go to the palace along a hidden route while a decoy will go up the main road. Iroh, who says the crowd's only gonna see his hand. The story tries to have a funny joke because he asks if his hand waving is filled with enough angst and says he's been practicing all morning. And somehow Ki thinks someone in white makeup is pretty. She's just being nice and assuming. Zuko makes up some excuses to get Ki to hold Ursa's hand, and she agrees. It's sweet that even Ursa has some people welcoming her home. It's surprisingly realistic because we see some people disappointed that they can only see a hand in the window, and it could be funny that Iroh's looking sad to make sure he'll get the hand waving right. Ty's made more relatable again by saying she feels like she's suffocating in her outfit. May says this is the most heavily fortified road in all of the Fire Nation and doesn't see why her dad would attack here in broad daylight. So she assumes Kay lied even though she's got a living lie detector who vouched for him. Eventually, one of the bad guys keeps the useless motivational speech going and doesn't let someone warn him about the people approaching him. So I don't know how he knew to dodge the fire. As usual, there's more panels than there needs to be in action scenes that only involve fire, which are inherently extremely repetitive and pointless with nothing actually happening because the things showing people get burned a lot isn't for kids. Why have a flash of light censor the impact when a bad guy gets hit? Just because it's done other things doesn't make it okay, it nearly ruins the panel. Eventually, Iroh leaves after the fighting's over. and Mei's suspicious because her dad sent these 6 idiots to take out Zuko even though he gathered an army. There's a distress flare from Suki and a tree falls, and the carriage gets surrounded by bad guys. Eventually, Zuko points out that the bad guys are too scared to even show their faces, so he firebends, and I love that it impresses his sister. There's more action scenes ruined by the flash of light, and Suki gets tied up, and the same thing happens to Zuko because the bad guys have a convenient tool for tying up really quickly. In the 1800s. Zuko's family is threatened, so Kei decides to free Zuko, and his boss is surprisingly smart because he knew a while ago that he had stopped being loyal, and that's why it proved useful to him. Mei shows up throwing things and warns Zuko to duck and throws another knife at the rope shooting cannon. Mei doesn't trust Kei even though he was obviously just fighting on Zuko's side, and he explains that the society fed him bad information and gets vouched for him. Eventually I see Ursa and Ikkum hugging Kei, who's staying brave, and Mei's dad tells his grunt not to hurt her. Kei attacks one of the bad guys with no impact shown, and Mei kicks someone over. Kei admits he deserved for her to fool him and gets hurt, and at least she cares about that. I don't know why people expected a firebender not to control people's fire. Of course he'll survive. And I have to remind myself that he can't stop holding back or his new family would be scared of him. There's a lot of panels not worth talking about in this story. And it turns out Mei let her dad get away. I guess she did it because he's her dad and not because she believed him. But you have to assume that because of what he just had to be written to say. Mei gets reminded Kei was fed lies and says she believes him. Zuko thanks the warriors, and eventually Kei is impressed by how big his castle is and wants to explore. She calls him Zuzu, and Zuko wonders where she picked that up, and so does Ursa. Now I have to wonder if Azula called him that in the search in front of her. They shouldn't be wondering this. Eventually Zuko thanks Iroh and is worried enough to tell Iroh to attend the Udao ceremony instead of him because he needs to stay here. He was about to suggest the same thing. Why did Zuko keep a portrait of Ozai in the palace? Why show us Mei's dad being threatened again? A month later, Kei says Mei wouldn't go out with him unless his leg healed, and that's because she didn't trust him because she doesn't understand him. Do they think it would take more than a month to bring him to a waterbender to heal him? That's needlessly cruel of the heroes. He says he joined the new Ozai society so he could finally belong to something since he's an orphan, and he doesn't care about politics. Eventually Mei sees cloaked people on the roof and finds out her brother's being kidnapped. Do we have to see her tell her family about it in the morning? It just leads to recap. I mean, go figure, we already knew that they would be upset. Zuko offers to help, nothing valuable happens, and the story ends. This issue by Jean Yang has Aang vanquish the evil spirit in one hit after Toph and the others in the mine get saved by her students, after Father reconciles with her only because he needed her to save his own skin. It's kind of hard to stop hating him then when we barely get to see him be a good father to her after that. And then Aang decides to let the refinery get rebuilt and just change the festival, purely to symbolize the fact that he's not being too traditional anymore, even though he's going to keep being too traditional. There's a lot of padding in between actual plot progression, which is always the main problem with these comics. This was the best arc so far, but it was always a little boring because of the needlessly slow pacing. Considering that the evil spirit was unlikable, I hate that we didn't see a lot more hits against him. One hit isn't enough catharsis for an arc of build-up. You could have replaced all of the padding caused by Toph's father being awful with more hits against this guy. The rift's mostly forgettable because its only sources of conflict were an evil spirit of the weak wanting to bully humans for a reason only he understands, which is done to death in this series, and one of the bad guys being greedy, which is the most understandable motive, but has way too weak of an impression in an action series full of magic. It's not like I saw Satoru's uncle being handed a wheelbarrow full of money and pushing it around to have fun after all, so there's no visual to remember with that. I never remembered that Toph's father was unaware of the mine being used because he thought it was too dangerous, because normally mines are a safe place that provide us with useful things. So the idea of a mine existing being bad is unintuitive. I never forgot that Toph had to keep his ceiling from collapsing on her and her father, but I did forget why she was put in that situation. Maybe if it was someone like Azula doing it on purpose, it would have been memorable. This issue by Jean Yang has the outside society threaten Zuko and his mother on her visit to the city. And that goes exactly as you'd expect, with a million panels with fire just for show. All of the slapstick was ruined by censorship, so the scene should have been much quicker since it was pointless. Even though I was looking forward to seeing Ursa enjoy her visit to the city, it was completely skipped over by only showing her get scared of the castle, so we don't get to see her enjoy parts of the city she'd like. Mei gives Kilo a chance because he defects, and her brother gets kidnapped because her dad's plan failed. He could have been kidnapped with the excuse that Ukuro was considered a failure because of his failure before the issue, and it would have made just as much sense, so there really was no point to the scene. As usual, it was an interesting story, but was absolutely full of padding. But it had an unusually large rate of heartwarming moments in it to make up for that, which made it good.